There are so many of you, and also we will try to take some questions from colleagues who are connected remotely. But first, I would give the floor to High Representative to brief us about the main outcomes of the meeting. High Representative, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon. Before going into details about today's meeting, let me express my deep sorrow on the attack in Heidelberg this afternoon. My feelings and my thoughts are with the families of the victims, with the people of Heidelberg, and with Germany. On the Foreign Affairs Council today, we had important topics, and we have been joined by two important guests. First, the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, for our discussion on Syria, and for the US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, for the discussion on Russia and European security. Let me start with this last point right away, because certainly it has been the most important point in the agenda. The most important takeaway is that we have reconfirmed our strong unity and our united approach on the challenges on European security. Our unity is strengthened, and there is no doubt on the Council about this. In this regard, we agreed Council conclusions that you have already seen, and they are more or less the ones that we agreed in the informal meeting at Brest. The Russian military build-up in and around Ukraine, and Russia's attempts to recreate dividing lines on our continent undermine the core foundations and principles on which European security is built and bring back dark memories of spheres of influence which don't belong to the 21st century. We reaffirm our full and unquestionable support to Ukraine, and that any military aggression against Ukraine will have serious consequences and massive costs for the perpetrator. We have had a long exchange with Secretary Blinken, and it was particularly useful to further assess the way ahead, jointly, the US and the European Union. And we will continue our very strong and close coordination with our partners, as we have been doing during this process. The European Union has not been absent of the negotiation, of the talks with Russia, because before and after each meeting we have been coordinating, discussing, informing together the US and EU. And I personally had phone calls and collective calls with the US and NATO in order to be completely aware of what's going on. There are three main elements that will guide our way ahead. First, our collective diplomatic efforts to convince Russia to take the path of dialogue will continue, even though the Russian rhetoric does inspire a lot of confidence. From this point of view, ministers have tasked me to continue coordinating the European Union position with all our key partners, notably US, NATO, and the OSCE chairmanship in office, to ensure the effectiveness of our efforts. And we call on Russia to continue engaging constructively in established mechanisms such as the OSCE and the NATO-Russia Council. We must also continue to support the efforts to reactivate the Normandy 4 process and for the work of the Trilateral Contact Group on the implementation of Minsk Agreement. We will also continue engaging with our international partners to explain what is happening in Europe and Russian threats and to try to clarify the disinformation that Russia is widespreading about these facts. We need to step up our strategic communication and push back disinformation. And I am inviting you to have a look at the European Union versus disinformation publications in the network, where we debunk some dangerous narratives that are being spread. Today we have put on this webpage an explanation about the 7 myths that Russia is widespreading about what's happening on the eastern border of Europe. Secondly, should diplomacy fail, we are going to do our best in order for diplomacy work. But should diplomacy fail, we are very well advanced in the preparation of responses to a potential Russian aggression. And certainly it will be a quick and determined action with a strong unity, not only within the European Union, but also internationally. Thirdly, we must step up our efforts to enhance Ukraine and other partners' resilience. And there are concrete actions that we can take, that we are taking. The President of the Commission announced today a financial assistance package made of an energy loan and grants to support Ukraine in the medium and long term, doubling our grants, our support, and providing an emergency financial support of 1,000 million euros. Something more than that. It's more than 1,000 million euros. 1.2 billion. 1.2. No? That's a very important amount of money that Vice President Dombrovskis and my colleague, Commissioner Oliver, will visit Ukraine to announce and to share this news with the Ukrainian authorities. We are also looking at how to support Ukraine in another key areas. On cyber and hybrid threats, our swift condemnation of the cyber attack and our readiness to assist Ukraine 10 days ago, when we were at Brest, also was a clear proof of our readiness, our capacity and will to act. We will be ready to respond to further attacks of this type, and we will continue to build up resilience on countering foreign information manipulation. We are ready to mobilize a mission to support Ukraine on fighting against cyber attacks, with resources provided by member states and coordinated by the European Union if needed. On security and defence, I have already made mention of the 35 million euros that we have granted in order to increase the logistic capacity of the Ukrainian army. And we are intensifying our work on the idea of an EU assistance mission in Ukraine in order to reform military education, and I hope that the decision will be taken soon. On our side, we will continue accelerating the preparatory work to deploy such a mission if member states agree on that. Finally, we must also keep close contacts with other partners, notably Georgia and Moldova, and continue to pass the message that enhancing internal resilience based on strong democratic institutions is important to strengthen the capacity to face external threats. And for that, we encourage Ukraine to continue working on the reforms ongoing. And last but not least, let me underline again that we are united in our position. Our unity is our most important strength. We talk about Syria, we talk about Libya, we talk about Mali, we talk about Burkina Faso. Let me say something about Mali and Burkina Faso. And let me jump to French, because this is something in which France is strongly engaged.
As I was saying already at the Gimnich meeting in Brest, the decision by the Malian authorities to propose a 4-year transition period and the proven deployment of the Wagner company, this is not a mercenary company, this is not acceptable for us. And in addition to economic and financial sanctions which we're working on, we are working on these lines. There will be a meeting on 26th of January with the Foreign Affairs Minister of the G5 Sahel, and I hope to have an opportunity to discuss the matter with them and with the Malian minister. No decision will be made until this meeting has actually taken place, and I hope that this meeting, this opportunity will enable me to put across a clear message and to consolidate our approaches on the matter. On Burkina Faso now, we are closely following with serious concerns the developing situation in Burkina Faso. The latest news is quite worrying. It would appear that President Kabore has been detained, and the national TV broadcasting service has been taken over by elements of the army. The President of the European Council spoke with the President of Burkina Faso. The situation seems to be under control, but today the news, rather worrying news, has been coming through, and now we hear that President Kabore has been detained by the army. We're calling for a return to the constitutional order and for President Kabore to be freed. On Syria, we discussed the procedure which the UN Special Envoy is proposing to follow, a step-by-step approach. But all member states agreed that until there is a clear political commitment from the Assad regime, we will not recognize, we will not communicate with them, we won't cooperate with them, aside from humanitarian aid to the Syrian people, which will be enhanced following the plan proposed by the UN Special Envoy. So I think that perhaps concludes my statements, and let me give you an opportunity to put questions.
Take first questions from the room. Then when you get the floor, there are microphones on the sides. And please introduce yourself, because it's hard to see who is behind the masks. And then colleagues on the screen, you can always raise the hand. So first question, Thomas Gutschke, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung.
High Representative, I'm here. When you went into the Council, you said that you expected Foreign Secretary Blinken, to explain why they decided to evacuate their embassy, or start evacuation of their embassy in Kiev. And you also said that any moves from the European side would be dependent on if there is a sufficient reason to do that. So my question is, did you hear any convincing reasons why embassies should take precautionary measures now?
Well, precautionary measures cover a broad range of actions. To close the door when you leave the house, for example. I'm not saying that you don't have to take precautionary measures. No, certainly not.
Let's say start evacuating stuff.
That's a different thing. Very precise precautionary measures. Well, in fact, Secretary Blinken has told us that it was not an evacuation. It was just letting the people not how would they say, free movement of people who are not crucial staff. The ones who are not crucial staff are free to decide to leave the country if they want. This is not an evacuation. And secondly, after exchanging among us and sharing the information that we have, and having listening to the Secretary Blinken, I don't think there is a need for us to do any kind of precautionary measure from the point of view of the number of our staff and their permanence in Ukraine.
Thank you. Next question we take online from Angela Mauro, Huffington Post. Angela, your mic will be unmuted in a second. It seems to be unmuted.
Peter. Thanks for the opportunity. It's on the same issue. Did Blinken ask the EU to do the same, the precautionary measures you were talking before the evacuation? What was the reaction of the member states? Is there unity on this issue as well? Thanks.
As I said, it was not an evacuation. It was just for non-critical staff, the possibility for the one who will to leave. If they are not critical and they want to leave, then they can leave. This is not an evacuation. But even with this, let's say, low-level precautionary measure, very, very low level, I think that it's a completely agreement between us, between the member states, that not even this precautionary measure is needed.
Thank you. Next question here from the room. I guess Yuri, right?
Yes, Yuri Shiko, Deutsche Welle. High Representative, I have two questions on Russia, of course. First, it's already 3 months since this current military build-up. And when I read today's conclusions by Council, it says about accelerating the preparatory work on possible sanctions should Russia attack. So my question is, why it has taken so long, and when can we expect the EU be ready with preparatory actions?
So long? What is taking so long? The attack or the preparatory measures? Or the
no, why it takes so long time to complete the preparatory measures? And the second question, the EU keeps everything connected to sanctions and secrecy, and I understand why. It makes perfect sense. But given the mere fact that the EU did not mention any measures, leaves a big leeway, a room for maneuver for the EU in the end, so to say, to introduce mere symbolic sanctions, because we know it's all on consensus. So my question is, how do you plan to convince Putin, Russian leadership, that the EU really means it when it warns of massive sanctions and of high cost and sanctions that hurt? Thank you very much.
Part of the deterrence is not to give information. So don't worry, the measures will be taken and implemented at the appropriate moment, if it comes.
Thank you. Next one on Zoom was Laurence Norman, Wall Street Journal. Laurence, your mic should be open already.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Peter and Hirep. Two questions for you, if I may. First of all, was there anything you heard from Secretary Blinken today, either about the talks in Geneva on Friday or the situation on the ground, that has shifted your view one way or the other on the likelihood of a Russian attack on Ukraine? And secondly, one of the foreign ministers, Mr. Rinkovic from Latvia, has raised the spectre of the build-up of Russian and Belarus troops in Belarus near the Baltic borders as being a threat not just to Ukraine, but potentially to NATO. Is that a concern that you share? Thank you.
Well, if I can say, as I said, I had the opportunity to talk with Secretary Blinken bilaterally or with other people, other institutions like NATO, before and after each one of their meetings with the Russians. So for me today it was almost nothing new, because I had the opportunity to have information directly from Blinken at the appropriate moment, immediately after or immediately before the meetings. This was not the case of my colleagues, that not one of them has been talking with Secretary Blinken. It would be impossible. We are 27. So it's important for the group, the Council, the 27 plus I, to listen to the explanation of Secretary Blinken. But for me it was almost nothing new, because I already got this information directly from him. And certainly no, I don't think there is anything new that can increase the feeling of fear about an immediate attack. No. And about the threat that could represent the presence of Russian troops in Belarus, and the threat not to Ukraine but to Lithuania, neither.
Thank you. Nous prenons question suivante de Philippe.
The next question is from Philippe. Thank you very much. From Le Soir. 3 questions, if I may, but very quick ones. Firstly, on the alarmism that you talked about when you came into the room at the outset, that you said that the time wasn't right to be overly alarmist. With the conversation with Antony Blinken, do you have an idea of the timetable for continuing the diplomatic talks beyond this week? Is this something that will continue during the course of the month of February? Then on preparatory measures and the sanctions, we talked about coordination with the partners. You regularly mention the US, UK and Canada. This possibility of coordinating the adoption of sanctions, could that be extended to other countries across the globe? I don't know, China, India. I mean, there are a lot. And then my third question is, the Romanian minister, I believe, the Romanian foreign minister, suggested that there should be a foreign ministers' meeting in Kiev as a sign of solidarity with Ukraine in the near future. Do you think that's an option? Yes. I can see you're very well informed. Yes, it was one of the proposals that was tabled. Why not? Why not? It's not impossible. The idea that we have foreign council meeting, they can decide unanimously to have a meeting externally. If there is unanimous agreement, then we can meet anywhere. Why not Kiev? If the situation were such that that would be one way of showing collectively what each and every one of us individually have demonstrated and what we've collectively demonstrated here and in Brest, namely solidarity and commitment towards Ukraine. But nothing was decided on that.
Alors, vous devez savoir s'il y a...
And you wanted to know whether there were other countries. In the EU, we coordinate with the US, of course, with Canada and the UK. And what was your first question, sorry?
C'était sur le...
It was on the alarmist attitude. You said we shouldn't be overly alarmist. And I wondered in the conversation with Blinken whether or not you think that the diplomatic talks will continue beyond this week. Listen, I think that there are maybe people who are wanting to play a bit of a game here, and I know what the threats are. We know what the degree of threats are, and we know how we should react, and we want to avoid reactions which could lead to an escalation and even escalate, as I say, in such a way that but we don't want people to have a breakdown on this. Now, on the timetable, the US is answering in writing the request from Russia. We know about that request because it's public, but we were able to discuss the terms of that response. I say that because I often read in the press that the EU is on the sidelines, is left out, is not at the table. We are very much up to speed. We are following the negotiations step by step. We were consulted, and we've been consulted also in the preparation of that response to the Russians. Of course, it's the US that will be answering because the request came from Russia to the US, and once that response has been sent by Blinken to Russia, they will examine that, and the timetable will depend on that response. And I don't think we can anticipate what that response will be.
To be posed remotely from Rosie. Rosie, your mic is being opened, and you can try to ask your question.
Thank you very much for taking my question. Rosie Burchard for Feature Story News. High Representative, I had a question for you. You wanted to send a strong message of unity today. There was much talk of unity. But before the meeting, we understood there were divergences among member states, for example, on whether to export arms to Ukraine. I know this doesn't directly fall under your competence, but did you discuss this issue? And moreover, do you think this suggestion of disunity really weakens your hand with regards to Moscow? Thank you very much.
Well, the European Union is a place where member states gather to discuss the competences that we share in common, not the things that only member states can do, each one on their own side. No, this issue has not been on the table.
Thank you. Voilà, Nicolas.
Excusez-moi en français.
Yes, I will put my question in French, if I may. The Sud-West newspaper. I have two quick questions in French. Firstly, on Mali. Firstly, you mentioned the possibility of sanctions, which might be postponed until after the meeting with the Malian Foreign Affairs Minister on Wednesday. What are you hoping to hear from the Malian minister so that the guillotine, sanctions guillotine, won't actually come down? And as I understand it, there won't be representatives of Burkina Faso, or will there perhaps be the Foreign Affairs Minister of the present government? Secondly, second question, you referred to, or President Macron referred to a European proposal on the security architecture which the EU is currently working on. Perhaps I misunderstood what President Macron said, but is this European proposal being developed now, or is it your contribution to the American response, or do we have to await a European counter-proposal to the Russian proposals? You don't have to apologize for speaking French, of course. It is an official language of the European Union, as we all know, and I'm very happy to be able to speak French in this press conference. So, as regards sanctions, the community of West African states, ECOWAS, has taken very hard-line sanctions against Mali. And before that, we agreed on a legal framework to apply sanctions, because the European Union, of course, needs a legal base, a clear legal framework, so that sanctions can be adopted without being challenged in front of the European Court of Justice. So the framework has been agreed, but the sanctions haven't been applied yet. We have been discussing possible sanctions in working groups. The Council was not yet today in a position to make a decision because the procedure had not been completed. So the Council, Foreign Affairs Council, didn't make a decision on that today. And of course, we won't wait until Wednesday. In any case, that even if we wanted to, that would not be possible because that's how the procedures work. But if we invite the Malian minister to come to Brussels, well, imposing sanctions the day before would not be a very good way of welcoming them. So the political will to apply sanctions is there because we have approved a legal framework. That's not a secret. But I think the work that is underway, this should be done in a way which is consistent with our diplomatic contacts with the countries of the Sahel and with Mali in particular. So I'm hoping to have yet another conversation. We've had a few already with the foreign affairs ministers of the Sahel countries, in particular of Mali, to see what their intentions are. with respect to the deployment, I was going to say Russian troops, but of the Wagner company, mercenaries, and to see what is how that would tie in with our military mission in Mali, and in terms of the presence of French troops and those of France's allies in Mali, we need to see what the outlook is. So it is pretty clear that this 4-year transition, so postponing the elections for 4 years, the elections which have already been postponed, this inevitably has will lead to measures. ECOWAS has done that, and the European Union will have to adopt measures. But before that, we will need to discuss this with our guests next Thursday.
We have time for tonight. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the interpreters. Have a nice evening and see you soon. Bye.